Good evening, friends. Today we are starting a very interesting session. This is Dr. Tamanna from Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, who has been taking sessions with you on very pertinent topics in the past few weeks. We talked about how to identify the products for exports. We also led a subsequent query from the exporters that once we've identified the products, which should be the markets that you should focus for the identified product categories. In the last session, we have repeatedly been repeating about the export opportunities that companies should technically take a call from multiple perspectives. So if you look into my last week session, you will find out that we found an interesting parameter when we went to identify business opportunities for exporters in the global market, where trade agreements really played a very strong role. So, which meant that one of the biggest criteria of why an importing country buyer should offer a buying lead to you, he was always buying this product from China. Why do you expect an importer sitting in Africa or in US or in European market to leave his existing buying lead from China and start placing buying orders to in favor of the Indian companies supplying the same products? So when we venture into the export market, there were three levels of competition that we have technically, highlighted. The first level of competition comes from the own Indian companies who are targeting for the same product in the same market. That was an L1 competition. What is very, very important when you start looking forward for which market you should be exporting, that comes in favor of the L2 player. You are exporting the same product as a Chinese company. You may be exporting tomorrow a same product as, for example, if I'm a mango exporter, I have Canadian, I have Mexican mangoes, I have Philippine mangoes, I have Thai mangoes coming to the same markets of the US, and I really want to be one of the preferred supplier. So your price becomes very important at this point of time, where the import duties, because technically as an Indian company, I sitting in India and my country of origin being India, I technically cannot expect there will be certain logistics costs that will go in, getting my products off onshore with the in the US market. So technically speaking, I would like to become price competitive on the tariff fronts, because the final landing price is a component of your FOB price, the logistics, the shipping cost, and the final import duty that my importer has to pay to accept my product. So it is very, very obvious for the companies or the importers to give businesses to the countries with which they have some level of import duty benefits. What these anxiety are. So that brings an anxiety of an Indian company, where he technically talks about why should I know about the trade agreements and what is this trade agreement concept all about? What is the list of these countries internationally and the countries that my India has technically signed the trade agreement? So can these trade agreements that India has signed help my exports grow? It is not only, friends, about an export opportunity, it is also about an import sourcing opportunity which can help you become more competitive. So, when we talk about taking an opportunity from a trade perspective, both import as well as export, and exporters' anxiety is typically running at various levels. Number one, it's a very, very interesting question. Which are the existing trade agreements which are signed by India? Where do I get this information? And then what do I do with this information? What are the upcoming ones which can possibly impact my business? A lot of companies come to us and saying that, man, we are in the domestic market, we do not export at all. But then why do we learn about trade agreements in that scenario? Because I'm not exporting, neither am I importing. You may be into a domestic business, friends, but you suddenly realize that until last month, the price in the average wholesale price in the market was very, very preferable in favor of the domestic companies. Now, suddenly, the prices have gone down, and you do not realize the reason probably behind it could be that India has signed either the import duties of the commodity in which you were trading. in the local market, they suddenly come down, as a result of which there is an import flux. And why did this import duty come down? Only because the India must have signed a trade agreement with any other country, which leads to the reduction of import duty as a part of the commitment. We are inviting more imports from a country with which we have signed a trade agreement. That is giving the supply becomes more than the demand and the prices goes down. So technically, you become a level 3 competitors to an exporter who is utilizing trade agreement to enter into your country. So it becomes extremely important whether I am into an export import business, I am not into an export import business, I am looking forward for an export opportunity, I am looking forward for an import opportunity. I am looking forward for no opportunity in export and import. I'm just a domestic trader in all the scenario. Since the global market have serious impact on the internal businesses within the domestic boundaries, it makes sense for companies at all levels to please be patient enough to hear a very interesting topic that we're going to take, answering so many plethora of these questions. As a business firm, how do I gain from the trade agreement signed by India? And when I talk about gaining, also go to my last bullet, which talks about that can I utilize that not only for exporting my products, can I also utilize these trade agreements in importing and doing a sourcing for my company's raw material, for example, for that matter. So does all the trade agreements, now India has, if I feel and I'm convinced that yes, Indian trade agreements will give you uh, enough business opportunities in the global market, then India has signed more than 20 trade agreements for that matter, 16 trade agreements for that matter. So I have signed a trade agreement with Singapore, I've signed a trade agreement with Malaysia, I've signed it with Japan, with Korea, with Sri Lanka, with SAARC countries, with Mercosur economies where we have Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, so many countries in the world. So does it mean that if I am a plastic exporter from India or I'm a textile exporter from India, can these trade agreement offer me a buying selling opportunity equally in all these countries who are sitting to buy my product just because I've signed a trade agreement with them? Let's talk about, you may be a chemical exporter, you may be Asian Paints, you may be into organic chemicals, you may be into the coil board, you may be into agro space. Now, every audience sitting in this session of mine can be into can be into typical agro sector or a chemical sector or a manufacturing sector, so to say. So across so many trade agreements, does it is giving equal benefits to all of you, irrespective of the product categories that you're dealing is the next important thing that we need to work on. Now, second is, and this rises to an immediate next question, is that out of the plethora of trade agreements signed by India, how do I choose the best one? If not all of them, because we have raised a question, this is the answer is no. So if all the trade agreements do not give equal opportunities to all the sectors, so in this certainly means that किसी एक ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट ने किसी एक प्रोडक्ट को ज्यादा बेनिफिट दिया होगा, दूसरे ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट ने किसी और प्रोडक्ट को ज्यादा बेनिफिट दिया होगा. This means technically that if I have to take a call from a company's perspective, I have to understand what is this ecosystem is all about and how do you what are those yardsticks that help you decide that this is a trade agreement that's very, very beneficial for us. Let's take the story forward. Now, this is not only about the Indian story. Now, India is a part of a limited set of countries with which we have a trade agreement, but there are also many countries with which India does not have a trade agreement. For example, I do not have a trade agreement so far with the Australian market, although we are trying hard. We do not have a trade agreement with Europe, although we are trying hard. We do not have a trade agreement with UK, again we are trying hard. We do not have any trade agreement so-called with the US market. So if India does not have a trade agreement with a lot of these dream destinations for Indian companies, does it mean that it is a threat for me as an Indian exporter? Because I will not get those so-called import duty benefits if I do not have a trade agreement and my competitors are selling the same product to the same buyer has a trade agreement. I'm lost. So this means, should I stop selling and looking for a selling opportunities in countries where I do not have a trade agreement? Let's understand these dynamics as well. So, asking these interesting questions, to answer these questions, we have to first understand the very basic rule of the game. The rule of the game, which gave rise to the concept of the trade agreement, was the concept of most favored nation. I have hinted upon it in my earlier session, but it is very important for audiences who are listening to my session for the first time. Very, very important to revise and reiterate this concept of most favored nation. What does it mean? Apart from the bullet points mentioned on the slide, which you can parallelly read, let me give you a very simplistic situation. You want to sell your ready-made garments to the US market, okay? Then I'm trying to see an opportunity in the US market. I'm not very sure whether I'll get a buying lead because I feel that somewhere down the line, the product that I am trying to sell to the US market is also the product that a Kenyan supplier is supplying from Africa. It is also the product that a China is trying to supply to the. So I have many competing players. तो जो product मैं US को बेचना चाहता हूँ, there are many competing players who are also targeting the same product to the same market where I want to sell. The rule of the game, which comes as a most favored nation concept in the WTO, is that if the buying country is a WTO member country, which is US in this case, and the supplying countries are also the WTO member countries, which is India in this case, maybe Australia, also Chinese, then we also have Lao PDR for that matter, you also have Bangladesh for that matter. So the rule of the game is that if the buying country is a WTO member country and the supplying countries are supplying exactly the same 6-digit HSN code, the concept of HS code is already been discussed by previous speakers, also by me in my product identification. So please refer to that. So for all the 6-digit HSN code, if all the countries are absolutely on a same selling the same 6-digit HS code, it becomes the law that a country cannot discriminate amongst WTO member state. It also means that the countries, which is a buying country, cannot discriminate in the import duties that they are charging for the products coming from US, coming from India into US, coming from Australia into US, coming from China into US. But then there is an exception to this clause. And this is where the whole business implications of regional trade agreements come to picture. This means that, let's take a dummy example. I was just referring to a textile export. It can be a ceramic export as well, India to US. Now, exports coming from India and export coming from China, exactly the same HSN code will get the same treatment, meaning the same import duty, since every WTO member country has to be given the same treatment by the buying country. Then in this case, why is the share of Canadians and why is the share of Mexicans better off than India? So if India is targeting this product to the US, we are hardly capturing 1% of the total imports. The total capacity and appetite of import in US is huge, but India is capturing only 1% of the total US imports. Why is the Taiwanese and Chinese are capturing 2%, 5%, but when it comes to Canadians and when it comes to Mexicans, they're capturing almost 24.9% of the total imports basket of the US. And why this is technically happening is because if India has to pay 25% rate of duty, the importers in US have to pay 25% of duty to import this product into US from India. The China also does not have a trade agreement with US, so they also have to pay 25%. New Zealand and Taiwan are paying something less than MFN. We will talk about all these things. But when Canadians and Mexicans are supplying the same product, it becomes 0% rate of duty. And that is where Indian companies will get a loss, even if you avail a lot of government incentives to participate in the trade fair in the form of market development assistance schemes, market access initiative schemes. You participate in a beautiful trade fair sitting in US with a beautiful stall, you make a lot of expense, but you need to be very clear towards market identification. It's an extension of my last week session where we talked about a country may be a great buyer of your product. You may be a great supplier of that product. You may be sitting with a huge source in your inventories. So you get excited about the fact that a country is a great importer of your product. Do not take this buyer-seller matching because a country is a great buyer. You get information from certain sources that yeah, US में माल बहुत import होता है. So you also get a kick and you start looking, participating and investing your hard-earned money to participate in the US fair without realizing a fact that जो product आप US को बेचना चाहते हो, which are the other level 2 countries or global competing countries who are also supplying the same product. What is the probability of a US company offering you this buying lead? And therefore, 25% ka difference is a huge, huge difference. In many countries, it is as high as 40%. So without looking into the possibilities of the buying opportunities, we need to take a call and why this is happening. So the rule of the game of the World Trade Organization, which is technically the most favored nation, does apply for all the countries. But there is an exception to this clause. The exception to this clause is that yes, the Canadians, the Mexicans, and the US, so is India, China, New Zealand, Taiwan, all of them are the WTO member countries. So logically, हर country को 25% duty लगना चाहिए था. But there is an exception to the clause that if apart from being a WTO member country, if the supplier countries are also having a free trade agreement with the importing country, you can very well officially, legally deviate from this law. And in this scenario, we have North American free trade agreement signed between US, Canada, and Mexico. So that is a tariff disadvantage that comes to the exporters of India. We should refrain ourselves, or we should actually price as an Indian company, can I price my product so beautifully that takes care of this tariff disadvantage? As a company, I have to take a call. क्या मैं अपनी logistics cost save कर सकता हूँ? क्या मैं अपनी economies of scale को इतना ज़्यादा बड़ा shipment बना सकता हूँ so that this tariff disadvantage with the Mexicans actually is taken care of. So that's a call that a company has to take, which can be an independent call. From a conceptual standpoint, the very reason that we are doing this session today is आपको कैसे पता चलेगा that जो product आपकी factory में बनता है, कौन सी country उसका buyer है, is what we have seen in the last class. But आपकी किस price पे बिकेगा, आपका competitor किस price पे बेच रहा है, the final landing price that will enter the US will be not the price plus the import duties that are levied on your product categories. And if there is a huge price difference, please make an informed decision before you start running for a buying lead that must have come to you from Alibaba or Amazon or even through a trade fair, right? Let's take the call. If we go by this logic that India doesn't have a trade agreement with the US and US का अगर आप trade agreement scenario देखोगे, so across the globe कोई ना कोई आपका ऐसा कॉम्पिटिटर कंट्री तो फंस ही जाएगा. हो सकता है आपकी फैक्ट्री में जो माल बन रहा है उसका कॉम्पिटिटर मोरक्को है. India doesn't have a trade agreement, Morocco has a trade agreement. हो सकता है the other person, maybe you are looking for an export of certain dairy products to the US market. India does not have a trade agreement with US, but Australia and US trade agreement has been signed way back in 2004. So there are so many countries in the world which have signed a trade agreement with the US. Now, if these countries unfortunately becomes the global competitors, exporting exactly the same product as your company in the US market, what should you not sell in the US market? And if you really want to sell, what should be your strategy? Same goes for the European Union. This is the toughest of all because Europe has been signing. It's a global presence. I mean, you see all the brown colors that you're seeing is the ongoing FTA negotiation, including India. And we are not very sure when this FTAs would technically be settled and finalized. But yes, the current green ones are the European free trade agreements with African economies, with the Middle Eastern economies, with Canadians, Mexicans, and some of the Latin American countries. So with such a strong uh, focus on the regional trade agreements with the Europeans, does this mean that Indian companies, in the absence of trade agreements, may lose the US or the European market against countries having RTAs with these importing countries? So, which countries have the most trade agreements? Now, if you look into the European Union, they have almost 42 trade agreements. Between 11 to 31 is where the Australians fall, the Chinese fall, the Indians are also falling. Lots and lots of the US, Canadians, Mexicans are between the range of 11 to 31. A lot of African countries have, they do fall, in the range of 1 to 5, 6 to 10 are the other CIS countries. So in such a scenario, my question are very, very interesting. Let's talk about the global trade agreements which are present globally. So NAFTA is what we have just seen. This is North American Free Trade Agreement. Then we also have, NAFTA is a very common trade agreement that companies must have heard of. And then we have CAFTA, which is Central American Free Trade Agreement. So you have the Central American neighbors, which is Costa Rica. Then you have El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua. These are countries which have signed the trade agreement amongst themselves. Then you have certain countries in Latin America in red, where you have signed a LADI, which means the Latin American Integration Association. Then you also have Mercosur within this, where you have Uruguay, Paraguay, Brazil, Argentina. Then you have countries like Venezuela, Bolivia. All these are a part of Mercosur. Africa is full of a lot of these trade agreements, like ECOWAS on the west coast of Africa. You have this economic community of West African states, which is Benin, Burkina Faso, all these Nigeria, Togo, all these countries. CMAC is another trade agreement, which is your economic and monetary community of Central Africa, where you have Gabon, you have Chad, you have Congo, you have all these prime economies. Now, SACU is very interesting. We'll talk about it in much more detail, which is South African Customs Union. इसमें 5 countries आते हैं. You have Nigeria, you have South Africa, Botswana, then you have Lesotho, and you have Swaziland as a part of the SACU trade agreement. Then you have certain free trade agreements in the Middle Eastern countries. You have GAFTA, which is Gulf Countries Free Trade Association. Then let's come to India. India is a part of the SAFTA trade agreement, which is done with the SAARC countries. We have Afghanistan, we have Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, Maldives, and Bangladesh. So you have all these SAFTA countries. Then we also have an APTA country, which is Asia Pacific Trade Agreement. ASEAN is an association of Southeast Asian nations, which are 10 countries. They've signed an agreement amongst themselves, which is Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia. Then you have Philippines and Thailand, Cambodia, Myanmar, Brunei, Vietnam, and Laos PDR. So you have 9 countries in Southeast Asian countries. Then there's interesting on the top that you see in orange color is a CIS Free Trade Agreement, which is Commonwealth Independent States. You have Armenia, you have Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and all these countries, Algeria, which is a part of the CIS. So the USSR had broken down into Commonwealth Independent States, and these countries have come together to sign a free trade agreement amongst themselves. Towards the extreme right, you will find in the stripes of red and blue, this is Australia, New Zealand Free Trade Agreement. Now, why are we knowing what's happening in the global world? Many companies approach us for making their global expansion plans, and they have one simple question that, ma'am, I understood that we should be aware about whether we are into domestic business or we are into the business of export and import. Sitting in India, we should be aware that which are the trade agreements that Indian government have signed. I understand, because if I sign a trade agreement and there's a reduction in import duties, there'll be extra foreign imports coming into this, and they act as my competitor of the product that I sell in the domestic market. But why are you teaching us about that 5 countries in South Africa, Namibia, have come together to make a South African customs union. Why should I know that there is a strong talk and rumor about the Mexico being chucked out of North America free trade agreement? So why should an exporting company, maybe you're a very small company sitting in India, listening to this session, but it becomes a very, very interesting call because any changes across any global market has a direct impact on your export opportunities to sell your products. How is it? Wait and watch. Okay, let's talk about the upcoming trade negotiations that was very much in news. You must be aware about it. These were the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. This was a lot of uh, discussions and negotiations and a lot of pros and cons on India was supposed to join RCEP and why did India get out of this whole system. So let's understand what is this RCEP all about. The Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, as we call RCEP, it is a mega regional economic agreement. It was negotiated since 2012. We are sitting in 2020. So it's been 8 years where the Southeast Asian nations, as we talked about, the 10 ASEAN countries that we've already named right just now, ASEAन कंट्रीज ने 6 FTA पार्टनर्स के साथ टोटल आरसेप बनाया है। वो कौन से 6 FTA पार्टनर्स हैं? ऑस्ट्रेलिया was one big giant. China was a biggest threat for India. New Zealand was another big threat. Japan and South Korea weren't that great a threat because हमारा already Japan और South Korea के साथ trade agreement है. इंडिया का ASEAN के साथ individual one-on-one free trade agreement है. We already have an agreement with Japan. We already have an agreement with South Korea. What was bothering me was something like Australia, and was bothering me was, of course, China. So a lot of Indian companies were feeling threatened that already we are bugged up with a lot of cheap imports of raw materials and final goods being imported from China, which is giving huge competition to the local companies. So what is the whole dynamics about Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat if we are not ready to stop imports from China? So how will a country like India become self-sufficient in producing certain commodity which is so cheaply being imported from China? Now, we are already bugged up by cheap imports coming from China, and that's the reason companies have repeatedly been requesting Government of India to impose certain anti-dumping duties on the goods that are being imported. जिससे थोड़ा तो महंगा करो. So this rate of cheap imports being dumped from China into India, which was already bothering the Indian companies because it was giving them huge competition and they were increasing the supply. And after the RTAs would have been, RCEP would have been signed, where China was one of the prime leaders, the companies in India were scared that, at the WTO rate of duty, when the import duties are high, we're already bugged up with Chinese import. Once we sign a trade agreement with China and the import duties come down as a result of our RCEP agreement, I will be completely swept away from the market. The steel companies in India was really bothered of these cheap imports of steel coming from China. Why Australia? Australia is the largest L2 player for dairy products. So if we would have allowed India to sign a trade agreement of RCEP, the Indian dairy companies, India is the largest producer of milk in the world. So and when we talk about in my next Saturday session, when we talk about managing global compliance in export, we will talk about that despite the fact that India is largest milk producing country in the world, why we are not able to export to the world, right? We should technically be the largest exporter. So because of a lot of global compliance issues in our dairy export, dairy and milk products, we were not able to export these products. So the dairy companies in India said, export वैसे ही नहीं कर सकते हैं. And we are already sitting with a huge number of supply. So if I am trying to technically sign a trade agreement with a giant dairy competitor, which was Australia, again my dairy industry would have gone for a toss. So there was technically the concerns of signing the RCEP, and finally India agreed to not to join the RCEP trade agreement. The other trade agreement where India is not a part of, but it was very much in news and very much talked about. You must be curious to know what this agreement is all about. This is Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement. So this is basically the NAFTA, which is Canada, US, and Mexico. They already have trade agreement with Australia. So there's NAFTA, then Australia, then certain countries in Southeast Asia, which is Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Brunei were select states, countries in the Southeast Asia. Then you have Japan and two Latin American countries, Peru and Chile. They took a call of technically coming together to make a Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. So India is not a part of. These are two upcoming trade agreements. This was signed way back in 2018 after 10 years of negotiation between 11 Pacific Rim countries. That's a common thing amongst them. It basically started with an agreement with 4 Pacific states of Brunei, then Chile, New Zealand, and Singapore. After that, the government of Australia, Vietnam, and Peru announced their intention to join. Malaysia and Mexicans and Canadians were they joined negotiations in 2010. Japan joined in 2013, and the US, after immediately joining, took the entire control of the whole negotiating process. So that's the background of Trans-Pacific Partnership. Now you must be curious, what is India doing? Now India is sitting with a huge number of trade agreements as well. Now we should be knowing, this should be on our tips. We have a trade agreement with ASEAN, where we have a trade agreement with the entire bloc of ASEAN under Indo-ASEAN Free Trade Agreement. Then we also have a trade agreement with Bhutan. We are a part of BIMSTEC, which is Bay of Bengal Initiative of Technical and Economic Cooperation. We have a trade agreement with Afghanistan. We have a trade agreement with Chile. We have a framework kind of an initial discussions with GCC countries, which is the Gulf Cooperation Council. We have a preferential trade agreement with Mercosur. As I already indicated, Mercosur is a bloc of countries of Latin America where you have, please understand guys, when we repeatedly talk about trade agreement, please don't consider that trade agreement always mean a free trade agreement. If you see on this particular slide, India has different kinds of trade agreement. I mean, we will talk about it in much more detail, how does it make a difference to your business opportunity. But then with certain countries like Bhutan, with ASEAN, with Sri Lanka, we've signed a free trade agreement. But if you look into the countries like Afghanistan and Chile and Mercosur, we have a preferential trade agreement. So there is a difference when a country enters into a free trade agreement, and there's a difference when you enter at a preferential trade agreement. So you should not take business opportunities coming equally across these trade agreements. The second myth that people have is that regional trade agreement is confined to a geography. Not really. When we tomorrow goes and enter, when Europe must have signed a trade agreement with ASEAN. So ASEAN is a Southeast Asian country. Europe is on the others is very very distant. So ये जरूरी नहीं होता है कि regional trade agreement एक specific region में ही sign होता है. Like SAARC for that matter is one region. ASEAN for that matter is an association of Southeast Asian nations. But then ASEAN may sign an agreement with ASEAN +3 where China is a part of. So China is logistically very far off. So two distant countries can also sign a trade agreement amongst themselves, like India is trying to sign one with Australia, and India is also trying to sign one with the UK. So similar when it goes to Mercosur, it's technically a part of the Brazil. Then you have Paraguay, Argentina, Uruguay, Venezuela, Chile, Peru, Bolivia, and now New Zealand is also eyeing to be the part of the Mercosur. And India has a preferential trade agreement with Mercosur. We have a treaty of trade with Nepal. We have a separate agreement. So India का ASEAN के साथ trade agreement है. India का Chile, Peru के साथ individual trade agreement है. तो कई बार we will also discuss. It is also very interesting to mention that India has a trade agreement with Mercosur, but there are certain countries in Mercosur where India has one-on-one relationship as well. Similarly, India is a part of the entire SAARC countries के साथ भी मेरा India SAPTA trade agreement है. उसके बावजूद मेरा बांग्लादेश के साथ वन ऑन वन ट्रेड रिलेशन है, मेरा श्रीलंका के साथ वन ऑन वन ट्रेड रिलेशन है. India has a trade agreement with ASEAN as a whole, which is a 10 country group amongst themselves, and we have again a one on one trade relation. Despite having a trade relation with ASEAN, we have a trade relation with Indo Thailand, Indo Singapore, Indo Malaysia, and that exactly is my point, that we can have. तो इसके मतलब क्या हो गया, एक ही कंट्री के साथ आपके पास बहुत सारे ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट्स हो सकते हैं. For example, Thailand, we have Indo-Thailand trade agreement. Thailand is also a part of the Indo-ASEAN trade agreement. Thailand is also a part of BIMSTEC trade agreement, and it's also a part of the AFTA trade agreement. So एक कंट्री के साथ मेरे चार ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट हो सकते हैं. नाउ इट इज माय इंटेलिजेंस टू अंडरस्टैंड एंड दैट मेरे प्रोडक्ट के लिए मेरा बायर थाईलैंड में बैठा है, मैं इंडिया में बैठा हूँ, अंडर विच ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट should I mention that in my documentation while doing export, that which document के अंदर मेरा कस्टम क्लियरेंस होना चाहिए. whether I am a plastic exporter, तो मेरे लिए इंडो थाईलैंड ज़्यादा अच्छा होगा. इफ आई एम अ राइस एक्सपोर्टर, मे बी इंडो आसियान मेरे लिए बेटर होगा. सो you have and the buyer is sitting in Thailand. So for a rice company, probably Indo-Thailand में Thailand जाना important नहीं है. For a rice company, Indo-ASEAN will be a better call. For a textile company, it is BIMSTEC which is a better call. So how do you take this call become a very interesting dimension of analyzing the business, and that's all is what we meant while introducing a concept of leveraging trade agreements altogether. So which arrangement to technically choose from becomes a very interesting proposition from a trade discussion point of view, whether I should venture into ASEAN or BIMSTEC or SAFTA. Now, the third question, and a very interesting question, arises that जिस कंट्री में मैं अपना एक्सपोर्ट करना चाहता हूँ, उस कंट्री के साथ I will have a competition. Of course, there may be other competing suppliers. जो प्रोडक्ट मैं यूएस बेचना चाहता हूँ, कनाडा एंड मेक्सिको भी बेचना चाहता है. जो प्रोडक्ट मैं कनाडा बेचना चाहता हूँ, वो फॉर एग्जांपल पाकिस्तान बेचना चाहता है. तो whenever I'm trying my exports to a particular country or a destination, we expect that कोई ना कोई तो लोकल कोई ना कोई तो L2 प्लेयर ग्लोबल मार्केट में एग्जैक्टली वही प्रोडक्ट बेचेगा. आई कैन नॉट बी अ सोल सप्लायर. सो analyzing a trade agreement situation against my L2 player can give me three situations. What can be those three situations? Situation number one, that if I'm trying to sell my produce to our exports to the Sri Lankan market, and I have a competition coming from the Canadians, then India has two trade agreements with Sri Lanka. We have an independent Indo-Sri Lankan trade agreement. We also have Sri Lanka as a part of the entire SAARC agreement, but my Canadians does not have a trade agreement. Does it mean that मैं क्या इंडिया से कुछ भी बेच सकता हूँ? I will always be competitive against a Canadian guy just because India has a trade agreement with Sri Lanka, and not one but two, and Canadians does not have. That's question number one. Situation number two could probably be just the opposite. What could that be? यार मैं अपना माल यूएस बेचना चाहता हूँ और कनाडा मेरा वहाँ भी कॉम्पिटिटर है. But then does it mean that if I do not have a trade agreement and my competitor has a trade agreement, so does it mean that मैं यूएस में कभी बिजनेस कर ही नहीं सकता if Canada is also selling the same produce? Let's answer that situation number two. Let's talk about situation number three. I found a buyer in the ASEAN country. It can be any of these. It can be Indonesia, Singapore में मुझे buyer मिल जाता है. यार चाइना का भी तो ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट है सिंगापुर के साथ. So if I am trying to target my export to a country where every possible country is my L2 player and they also have an FTA, so हम दोनों का FTA. So I repeat, first situation, I have an FTA. My competing country supplying the same produce does not have an FTA. Second situation, just the opposite. I do not have a trade agreement. My competitor has a trade agreement. Third situation, हम दोनों का ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट है. ASEAN for that matter, यार इंडो ASEAN फ्री ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट है. So what? चाइना का भी है, ऑस्ट्रेलिया का भी है, यूएस का भी है, यूरोप का भी है, जापान का भी है, कोरिया का भी है। तो यार ये तो कोई ना कोई कमोडिटी में कहीं ना कुछ तो आसियान में सप्लाई होगा। डज इट मीन द आसियान what ASEAN FTA offers me a trade benefit, it is going to every Tom, Dick and Harry. तो फिर मेरी सरकार ने इतना टाइम क्यों इन्वेस्ट किया to sign a trade agreement with ASEAN? Let's talk about it. In order to analyze all these questions that we have been discussing about, let's start breaking your anxiety and fulfilling giving you answers to these questions. Now for this, I will try to make a very simple question that we have three companies in India and and maybe all these three companies in India are dealing into three different product categories. Mr. X, maybe one of you amongst the audience is Mr. X. So Mr. X is exporting coconuts. Mr. Y is exporting chemicals. And Mr. Z is exporting textile. ये तीनों Indian companies हैं. They get to read a newspaper on 1st of January 2010 that India has signed a trade agreement with Indo-ASEAN trade agreement. Now my question to all of you is very, very simple. Will it be bringing smiles on your face, or it will be a sad news for some of you and smiles on some other face, or it is no news for any one of you? How would you react? Now, your reaction should be as specific as a 6-digit HSN code. इसीलिए this session of mine, go back to understand the product selection and market selection session. You will try to see that there is a synergy between what we learned today and the synergy of identifying the products for export. So maybe your product for export selection was beautiful, but you missed on leveraging the trade agreements just by a small change in your product, which could have beautifully changed your 6-digit HSN code, and you would have lost the business opportunity or gained the business opportunity. How does it take a call? Let's understand. So we have three companies in India. It's coconuts, chemicals, and textile. The logic that and the reasoning that we're going to learn now is exactly the reasoning that can also vary within textile. Within textile, एक कंपनी कॉटन में डील कर सकती है, एक कंपनी सिल्क में डील कर सकती है, एक कंपनी वूल प्रोडक्ट्स में डील कर सकती है. Within cotton, also one country may deal in organic cotton, the other may deal into चरखे से निकला हुआ cotton, and the third can deal into machine made cotton. Guys, for me, when we handhold companies at IFT who approaches us, we go to that level of specifics because trade agreement negotiations are done product by product by product. So you cannot make an assumption that India ने किसी country के साथ trade agreement sign किया है. Companies approach us, friends, trust me on that ma'am, we are going to sign a trade agreement with Australia and Europe and UK in times to come. So can I start preparing and start looking for a buyer in a country? Because the mistake that most of us do is we assume a business opportunity knocking our door by default if we are signing a trade agreement. It does not happen in a way. Let me give you an example and the reason behind it. The reason behind it, guys, is there are how many? If you look into a 2-digit chapter code, so we have, if you look into the HSN code, and let me take you to the same database that we have seen in our last class when we talk about let's go to the trade map. Okay, now I am trying to look forward for an opportunity to sell my produce in the international market, and I feel that there are a lot of buyers sitting across the global market who are having a balance of trade negative for my country, for my product, and they are technically the largest importers of my product. Now, there is a difference of let's take an example. So the example that we have just taken, say for example, textile or coconuts or something. So let's take an example of an agro product, for example, 100630, which is technically I'm a rice exporter company from India. So if I'm trying to export rice, there are many countries in the world which are technically the buyers of rice. So I'm trying to take the rice and I click on trade indicators and I get to know the countries in the world which are the rice importing countries. Let's do it. Okay, the site is pretty slow, but I would love you to select the products. Let's go and do it ourselves. Let's do it not a session mode, but a practice session. So you can just click on login and get the products. So where you have the list of total all products, you have the list of all the 6-digit code. Pick up a product from 01. You can pick up a product from 01 to 98. Okay, so when you're picking up a product, you have almost 98 chapters to go, guys. So any Indian company could deal in any export of any of these chapter codes. And when it comes to a specific chapter code, it is also a 6-digit code. So when I divide 01 to 98 at a 2-digit level, your company may be dealing in any of these commodities. So again, as it say, I can look into all products category. So when I do 00, it gives me the all products, and technically I'm trying to take 01 to 98 chapters. Now आपकी company 01 to 24 is agriculture, and 25 to 98 is technically a manufacturing sector. So I can take any commodity at a chapter level. If I divide 01 to 98 chapter, I can have multiple option. I can have 01 for that matter is live animals. I can do horse business, I can do mules, I can export birds, I can export anything. So I technically can export any 6-digit code as an Indian company, and I have a plethora of opportunities to sell it in the global market. Now, what makes a difference is, guys, that I'm not dealing at a chapter level. I have to talk about a specific 6-digit code for my custom clearance procedure. So I have a typical 6-digit code and I identify, and that's the reason I've identified specific rice. So when companies come to us, ma'am, hamara chawal bikwa dijiye, we technically ask them, is it 100610 that you're referring to, or 20 or 30? Because the minute your 6-digit code is changed, the country of where the import possibilities are there would technically change. So if India is one of the largest exporter of 100630, we find Iran, Saudi, China, and US are the largest buyers of rice in the world. This is how is a process that we learned in our last class. Let's take and connect it with the trade agreement session today. Now, when I click on Saudi Arabia, it will tell you that जो कंट्री वर्ल्ड की सब सेकेंड लार्जेस्ट इम्पोर्टर है आपके प्रोडक्ट के लिए, आई एम गिविंग यू एग्जांपल ऑफ राइस, आप अपना प्रोडक्ट डाल के इसको चेक कर सकते हैं. सो यू कैन क्लिक ऑन सऊदी अरेबिया टू नो, यार सऊदी अरेबिया में बी द लार्जेस्ट बायर, but is Saudi Arabia buying from India at all or not? So we figure out that wow, 78.5% of the total rice that is being imported in Saudi Arabia is technically coming from India. And the rate of duty that is offered in Saudi Arabia is technically zero. अब आपको ये समझने की ज़रूरत है. ये जो last column है, this is a making or breaking the deal. Now, in Saudi Arabia, we have been fortunate that despite we do not have any specific trade agreement, इनका MFN rate of duty ही zero है. इसीलिए आप देख रहे हो सब कंट्रीज का जीरो है. चाहे मेरा कॉम्पिटिंग प्लेयर कौन है, पाकिस्तान भी अपना चावल सऊदी अरेबिया बेचता है, इंडिया भी बेचता है, थाईलैंड भी बेचता है, वियतनाम भी बेचता है. हर कंट्री को इन्होंने 0% रेट ऑफ ड्यूटी दिया है. और ये तभी पॉसिबल हो सकता है when they have given this duty-free access, because Saudi Arabia is one of the largest consumer of rice and they do not have a lot of rice production, do not have actually rice production of their own, so they become a net importer of rice, and the last column becomes zero for all the countries and the supplier, because the MFN rate of duty in itself is zero. Let's go back and see. तो Saudi Arabia becomes a great market for me. पर मेरा दुनिया का सबसे थर्ड लार्जेस्ट बायर ऑफ राइस becomes China. तो क्या मैं चाइना में भी अपना चावल बेच सकता हूँ just because it is the third largest buyer of China of rice in the world? So I click on China and see that trade agreement जानना क्यों जरूरी होता है. Now China में Thailand is capturing 24.6% of the total rice import in China. Myanmar is capturing 18.6. India यार तो मुझे दिखाई नहीं दे रहा है. It's 0%. And somewhere down the line, we will see the last column. It's 0% for Myanmar. It's 65%, and it is again 0% for Vietnam, and it is 50%. Now you see, this is again a very interesting thing. It's 50% for Thailand. It's another 50%, 50% for Vietnam, and it is Cambodia is 0%. Again, if you look into India, it is 65%. बाकी सारे suppliers के लिए 65. तो इनका MFN rate of duty will be 65 जो इन्होंने सबको ऑफर किया है. किसी कंट्रीज के साथ इनका प्रेफरेंशियल ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट होगा, किसी कंट्रीज के साथ इनका फ्री ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट होगा. प्रेफरेंशियल ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट का मतलब क्या होता है? हम आपको जीरो ड्यूटी नहीं देंगे, हम आपको प्रेफरेंस देंगे. इसीलिए जिस कंट्री के साथ वी साइन अ प्रेफरेंशियल ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट, MFN रेट ऑफ ड्यूटी और जीरो के बीच में रिड्यूस ड्यूटी होगी पर जीरो नहीं होगी. फॉर कंट्रीज वेयर यू हैव साइंड अ फ्री ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट, you will make it zero. So that's the difference between a preferential trade agreement. So if India is targeting Afghanistan or Mercosur or Chilean market, we should be extra cautious by not assuming कि अब हमारा trade agreement है तो everything will become zero. We have signed a preferential trade agreement and not a free trade agreement like in case of Sri Lankans, right? So that's one thing. The second thing that I wanted to pay attention to all of you is that we have 01 to 98 chapters, and if I divide one chapter at a 2-digit level, this has a 4-digit code. 1006 is rice, and within rice you have a 6-digit code. Within 6-digit code you have so many 106, 10, 10, 11, and all these are a further classification and the specifications of rice, talking about exact ratios and lengths, and these are specifications that are being traded in the global market. So first thing first, you should not be looking forward for a global buyer of rice if you want to venture into a rice trading business. Your buyer will change the minute you are shifting from a long grain seed to the rice seed in husk, and आपका length and ratio change हो जाता है, आपका buying country change हो जाएगा. वहाँ उसी बाइंग कंट्री में आपकी अपॉर्चुनिटी चेंज हो जाएगी डिपेंडिंग ऑन व्हाट इज द इंपोर्ट ड्यूटी, वेदर यू आर एंटरिंग एट अ WTO रेट ऑफ ड्यूटी, your competing player is entering at a 0% rate of duty or a preferential rate of duty. That makes all the difference. The second thing that I wanted to bring home a point is that if you're talking about at a 6-digit level, so 01 to 98 को अगर मैं 6-digit chapter में divide करता हूँ, so I have more than 5,000 products. Now imagine the example that I wanted to show you, that one company is exporting plastics, other countries into looking for opportunities for textile, and third country is looking for an agri products, for example coconuts for that matter. Then in that case I have signed an Indo-ASEAN trade agreement. तो क्या 5,000 products जो इंडिया से आसियान में एक्सपोर्ट होते होंगे वो सब 0% rate of duty हो जाएगा because we have signed a free trade agreement with ASEAN. This means anything that is going from India, until yesterday they were entering at the MFN rate of duty. Now suddenly out of the blue, because we have signed a trade agreement, suddenly सारे के सारे 5,000 products at a 6-digit level will enter 0% in ASEAN. Not really. Let's understand what governs this rule. हो सकता है guys, is it a very commonsensical thing? Isn't it possible कि whenever two countries sign a free trade agreement, both the countries have this insecurity that यार अगर मैंने FTA sign किया तो मुझे उस कंट्री के इंपोर्ट्स को रिसीव करने के लिए मेरा MFN रेट ऑफ ड्यूटी को, अगर प्रेफरेंशियल टैरिफ रेट है तो थोड़ा बहुत कम करना पड़ेगा, और अगर FTA है तो बिल्कुल जीरो करना पड़ेगा. So this means that there are certain commodities in which India may be good at. There are certain commodities in which Thailand may also be good at. There are certain commodities in which entire ASEAN may also be good at. For example, silk. India ki, Banarasi silk, Kanjivari silk, Assam silk, we are one of the great silk producers and manufacturers, and we have an export capacity. Now, if you are a Banaras silk cushion cover supplier or a sari suppliers, you will say that Indo-ASEAN FTA sign हो गया, अब तो मैं silk के cushion cover Thailand में market देखूंगा. But Thailand is sitting with its own silk. Cambodia is sitting another very interesting silk. Lao PDR has its own silk. So why the hell are they going to give you buying lead despite the fact you've signed a trade agreement with them? So do not take trade agreements for granted. Even if the two governments sit across the table, and the way the negotiations happen, अगर सारे के सारे 5000 प्रोडक्ट्स को इंपोर्ट ड्यूटी जीरो हो जाती तो हम ये सेशन ही नहीं कर रहे होते कि हाउ डू यू लेवरेज अ ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट इन अ पर्टिकुलर मार्केट. द वेरी रीजन दैट वी आर डूइंग दिस सेशन इज बिकॉज ऑफ द वेरी फैक्ट दैट हर ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट में हर प्रोडक्ट का इंपोर्ट ड्यूटी MFN से जीरो नहीं होता है. सो इट इज माई call, and it is my responsibility as an exporter to actually go to the Commerce Ministry website, try and see which are those commodities on which the duty relaxations have been done. There are certain commodities which are common across countries and the trading partners. As if, for example, I give you an example of silk. Basmati rice, for example, India is having huge export potential of basmati rice. बट लाओ PDR का अपना चावल है, थाईलैंड का अपना चावल है, वियतनाम का अपना चावल है, फिलीपींस का अपना चावल है. हर कंट्री का अपना एक चावल है, तो वो आपसे चावल क्यों खरीदेगा? एंड व्हाई द कंट्रीज व्हेन दे सिट अक्रॉस द टेबल टू नेगोशिएट द ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट, दे विल से यार वी आर गोइंग टू साइन अ ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट बॉस, बट वी आर नॉट वांटिंग टू डिस्कस these tariff lines which are very important for my country. मेरे पास अपना चावल बहुत है. I don't want to reduce the MFN rate of duty to zero and get a rise from you and spoil the business of my local companies of rice. So whenever a trade agreement is signed, it is not taken for granted that everything under the sun that you may be exporting or wanting to export, the import duties will come down from MFN to zero. So ये myth number 1 है. तो अब ये पता कैसे चलेगा कि किस प्रोडक्ट को किस कंट्री में कैसे बेचा जाए? So that is what we are trying to see as a logic when we talk about this particular session. So I repeat, there are 3 companies in India, 3 different products. It doesn't mean that all the 3 products will become zero if the free trade agreements have been signed. So I'll give you the example why this happens. I've already given an example of rice and silk. Now, I'll give you a very interesting example of why Mr. X have been allocated as a dummy example for coconuts. This is a live example that I'm trying to share. There was a company who had approached us to looking forward for an export opportunity to sell their coconuts in the Southeast Asian countries. I mean, and they also wanted to open the packaged coconut juice factories in India. Now, the company had approached us that, ma'am, should we procure? This is another very interesting feature of a trade agreement. Should we procure these coconuts from our own country, which is as a raw material? I need desiccated coconut. मुझे डाब चाहिए because I have to set up a factory of a coconut packaging water, packaged coconut water. So I need coconuts as a raw material. So I have 2 options. या तो मैं इसको मलेशिया से खरीदूं, which is another biggest supplier of coconut, या फिर ये माल मैं इंडियन कंट्री से, केरला से खरीदूं, कहीं से भी डाउन साउथ से खरीदूं, right? Now, that was the time it was very, very interesting. Now, if under Indo-Malaysian trade agreement, इसको ध्यान से सुनिएगा, it is always a it is always a concern of any government for that matter that whenever the trade agreements are signed, there is obviously on certain products you will reduce the import duty, and there are certain products on which you do not reduce the import duties. Okay. So if for example, the produce on which you have not reduced the import duty is acting as a raw material, जैसे for example China, हमारा चाइना से आरसेप साइन नहीं करना बहुत लोगों को भारी भी पड़ा है, because companies who were dependent on China for for importing the raw material to make a value-added product for selling it in India or export, they were actually eyeing the RCEP agreement because they were thinking कि अभी उनको 60% MFN rate of duty पे माल मिलता है चाइना से, क्योंकि वॉल्यूम बहुत ज़्यादा होता है तो वो 60% उनको इतना पिंच नहीं करता है, and pricing is very competitive. So they were very, very happy that tomorrow if we sign a trade agreement with China, then the MFN rate of duty will come down to zero and we will have become more profit margins will probably increase, which is the case that companies should consider that अगर मैं कोई product XYZ country से खरीद रहा हूँ, why don't I source that raw material from a country where I have signed a trade agreement? Maybe I save a lot of my cost in terms of the heavy WTO rate of duty that I may be paying. But इससे नुकसान क्या है? So from a government standpoint अगर आप देखेंगे तो government को हमेशा ये challenge रहता है that if I reduce the import duty as a part of an FTA, I'm obviously encouraging a lot of imports coming into my country. Okay. In that scenario, मैं किसी को खुश कर रहा हूँ तो किसी को ना खुश भी कर रहा हूँ. कौन खुश होगा? If I am an importer of a raw material, मेरी पूरी फैक्ट्री ही उस raw material, cheap raw material से चलती है तो मैं खुश हो जाऊंगा. But अगर मैं raw material producer ही हूँ, I am a raw material supplier of that product that you have imported from outside, then India में मेरा माल कौन खरीदेगा? Right? So, I mean, there is a cluster here next to Delhi where stainless steel के बर्तन बनते हैं. So, when India was signing this trade agreement of RCEP and China, they were very happy. But companies, Indian companies, Jindal Steels, Kalyani Steels, I mean, they were the steel manufacturers in India. They said, अगर तुम बर्तन बनाने के लिए चाइना से स्टील खरीदना शुरू करोगे तो भाई मैं अपना स्टील किसको बेचूंगा? So there is technically a challenge that Atmanirbhar Bharat and Make in India schemes will go down the drain if we are so import dependent on a lot of commodities that Indians could otherwise manufacture. So coming back to the point that when the trade agreements are technically signed, the government has to take the concern of both the parties. If I put a product in a positive list, इसको हम क्या बोलते हैं? Open category or positive category. कि जिन HS code में I have no issues in reducing the MFN to zero, I put them in the open category of trade agreement. For certain products where I am not comfortable to put it in the open category, I will say I am not going to discuss about these commodities. हम कल भी MFN में business करते थे, आज भी MFN में business करेंगे. The benefit of trade agreement is not going to go on these 6-digit HSN code. Please check this list before you are looking forward for any import or an export opportunities. That's point number 1. Now आता है third category. So एक हो गया open list, एक हो गया negative list. अगर आपका product open list में आता है, it is a very good news for you. Immediately pick up an opportunity, look for a buyer, select a country for export. अगर आपका product negative list में आता है, please do not try to look for a buyer in that country because buyer मिलेगा ही नहीं. That importer will technically try to seek business opportunities from another FTA जहाँ पे ये product open category में होगा, and that is because this is a call that a government has to take. Maybe Thai importer की नज़र से आप देखते हैं तो Indo-Thailand FTA में चावल को negative category में रखा और Indo और थाईलैंड जापानीज एफटीए में यही प्रोडक्ट ओपन कैटेगरी में रखा है. सो ही विल प्रेफर टू बाय दिस प्रोडक्ट फ्रॉम जापान एट अ 0% रेट. व्हाई इज ही गोइंग टू एक्सटेंड दिस अपॉर्चुनिटीज टू यू? सो नेगेटिव प्रोडक्ट कैटेगरीज को रिफ्रेन योरसेल्फ फ्रॉम लुकिंग फॉर एन एक्सपोर्ट अपॉर्चुनिटीज इन अ नेगेटिव प्रोडक्ट कैटेगरी. Third category जो I'm just trying to tell you from a coconut standpoint. So what happened is that when we started looking for a sourcing opportunity that हम केरला से माल खरीदें या फिर हम ये कोकोनट्स मलेशिया से लेकर आते हैं, क्योंकि इंडो मलेशिया ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट could have technically offered us a great benefit. Now, if I would have bought this, and you'll be surprised that if I would have bought this from Malaysians, or if I would have brought this from from Thailand, I could technically have, if I bring it at 0% rate of duty, the coconut farmers who were actually feeling already distressed because of a lot of governmental schemes, they were not finding laborers to climb the tree and get those coconuts, for the businesses. So already the labor cost has gone up in India. And if companies would not have bought from them and would have imported, it would have really resulted into a very, very, wrong business move from a part of the policy move from a part of the. So in such a scenario, the government has to take the business interest of both the parties into consideration. So there are certain examples that I can share. There's a concept of a sensitive list where we actually keep a strong check, and we also have tariff rate quotas, and we fix up an quota in a tariff rate quota concept. What we do is that we fix up an import quota, for example, and we have two rates of duty. So we fix up a tariff rate quota that हम मलेशिया से import तो करेंगे, क्योंकि there are a lot of companies, अगर वो locally procure करते हैं तो उनको माल बहुत महंगा पड़ रहा है. तो अगर वो मलेशिया से procure करेंगे, थाईलैंड से procure करेंगे, श्रीलंका से procure करेंगे, तो शायद ये माल उनको सस्ता मिल जाए. So we have a concept of a quota system. So we fix up an import quota. Until the time the country is importing that much within the quota, there's a very less import duty. So आपने किसको खड़ा कर दिया? The factories who are looking forward for the raw material import, आपने उनको खड़ा कर दिया. But there is a limit to this quota, because suppose, for example, the total import requirement of a raw material for a country, for example, is 50,000 metric ton. So the government can fix up an import quota of 35,000 metric ton to give some level of tariff advantage and business advantage to companies and corporates who are trying to import this as a raw material under this free trade agreement. But once the 35,000 metric ton is over, you have a remaining balance of 15,000 metric ton, which is also a requirement of the country. So the minute 35,000 tons of quotas are filled, the import duty, probably the within quota with a very less duty or even 0%. You can also do an extent that quota ke andar agar import hua, it will be treated as an open category. The minute quotas are filled, it goes as a negative list and you start importing at the higher rate of duty, maybe back to the WTO rate of duty, which is the MFN rate of duty. That automatically disincentivizes the exporters to importers to technically bring the imports, and the remaining balance business can go to the raw material suppliers of your own country. So that technically gives you the three status in a trade agreement. Number one, I repeat once again, please check जो product आप किसी भी RTA country में export करना चाहते हैं, where India has a trade agreement, if please check आपका product open category में है, then it is an immediate very interesting news for you, because you were paying the WTO rate of duty before the trade agreement, but you pay a very less rate of duty after the trade agreement, which can be even zero for that matter, depending on whether it is an FTA or a PTA. अगर आपका product unfortunately has gone in a negative list, this means you are not prohibited. ऐसा नहीं है कि अगर इंडो थाईलैंड एफटीए में हमने चावल को नेगेटिव लिस्ट में रखा है तो आप चावल थाईलैंड नहीं बेच सकते हो. यू कैन स्टिल डू द बिजनेस, बट द कंपनी हैज टू टेक अ कॉल कि आप पहले भी जिस रेट में बिजनेस कर रहे थे, यू विल स्टिल डू द MFN, यू विल स्टिल सप्लाई योर प्रोडक्ट एट द सेम रेट ऑफ ड्यूटी. द बेनिफिट ऑफ इंडो थाईलैंड एफटीए may not, will not, I will not say may, will not be incurred on a product categories at a 6-digit level at a negative list. The third category is technically the sensitive list, where the government is extra cautious to maintain the balance between the raw material suppliers and the corporate needs of the raw material. So these are three different categories. Let's take the story forward. You are again the three companies. You're exporting textile, you're exporting chemicals, and exporting coconuts. Now, for example, I'll give another example, Indo-Korea trade agreement. We again signed Indo-Korea in January 2010. Now the business situation changes. आप जिस market में बेचना चाहते हो, your country has a trade agreement with that country, and all the three products, whether you're selling textile or chemicals or coconuts, all three of them are in Indo-Korea trade agreement. They are in open category. So technically, it's a very good news for all of you on papers because all of them are having a gala time. अब आपका product open category में है. This means you were paying MFN rate of duty before Indo-Korea trade agreement, and you start paying 0% rate of duty because your HS code has fallen into the category of open category. But again, do not take for granted. For example, if textile सिर्फ open होना जरूरी नहीं है, ओके, open के साथ एक rider भी होता है जो हम मिस कर देते हैं. That what is the rider? The rider is that अगर textile open में तो है, but if open के साथ साथ उसके आगे एक rider लगा होता है. It's almost like when you say mutual funds are subject to terms and conditions and risk. Please read the documents carefully. Same logic goes to a trade agreement as well when we talk about that it is in the open category. So Korea will say, I'm okay to make it zero. Yes, I agree. During the time of negotiation, they would agree that yes, I was charging MFN rate of duty before. I will charge 0% rate of duty now. But when you actually targeted the custom clearance, they said, no, we will not clear the custom at 0% rate of duty. And that is the time when you get confused that, यार मैं तो देख कर आया था, ये डॉक्यूमेंट तो बोलता है ये ओपन कैटेगरी में है. So the Koreans will say, please read the terms and conditions properly. And what are those terms and conditions? कि आपने ओपन के साथ साथ आपने उसके साथ एक और कैटेगरी रखा था, which is, say for example, E0. So again, the example is we have to talk about the time period of concession. हर कंट्री अगर आपको ओपन कैटेगरी में डालती भी है तो वो ये कॉल ले सकती है that my local industry are not prepared to accept your import on an immediate basis. I am ready because I'm sitting on the table to negotiate. So कोई ना कोई product तो मुझे open category में रखना ही पड़ेगा ना. Otherwise, why am I sitting to sign a trade agreement? And trade agreement is a two-way process. I cannot just ask for the tariff eliminations and reductions. I have to give the tariff reductions to the countries जिसके साथ में trade agreement sign कर रहा हूँ. So it is very interesting news for an exporter when we sign a trade agreement, but it can be a scary news to companies who are either working as a competition or something that we are importing. So it's a two-way process. So when I'm looking for an export opportunity in Korea, for example, the Koreans would say, yaar, ruk jao. I also produce the same product that you produce, and I also have a threat that after signing this product as a positive category or an open category, my industries need some reaction time. So I cannot open this market completely for you on day one. And that can be different for different markets. Like Japan, for that matter, they have a different nomenclature. Sri Lanka has a different nomenclature. कोई 5 साल का टाइम मांगेगा, कोई 10 साल का टाइम मांगेगा, कोई immediate 1 साल का टाइम मांगेगा. Like in Korea, they've kept it 3 categories, which is E0, E5 and E8, which means that whether the product is open, but open के साथ, if it is E0, it will mean that if I have signed an agreement on 1st January 2010, the export opportunity will immediately start, which means that it is E0. On day 0, you can look for an export opportunity. So it's a very great news for companies if your product is falling in open E0 category in Korea, which will mean that day 0, whatever is the rate of MFN, it will come down to 0. But if this is going to E5, this means tariff eliminations will happen in 5 equal annual stages. This means हम 2010 में अगर agreement sign करे हैं तो 2015 में जाके ये import duty 0 होगा. If it is E8, this means 8 years down the line, 2018 में 7th year में जाके धीरे धीरे export होगा, but import duty reduce होगा. But that doesn't mean कि आपको tariff advantage नहीं है, which technically means that if I am sitting in 2010, so technically if I give you an Excel calculation, this Excel calculation will go something like this. So if you try to take a call, I am sitting in 2010. So I sign a trade agreement in 2010 with a particular country, say for example Korea, and when I sign the WTO rate of duty that I was in any case were paying to enter your market was, for example, 100%. Now my product category falls in E5. This means that it is 100 divided by 5, which becomes 20%. So what will Korea do? Because my HSN code is in the E5 category, हर साल होगा 5, my opportunity will start in the 5th year, but 5 साल ऐसा नहीं होगा. Don't assume. Suppose I'm sitting on 2011 and I make this sheet and calculation. So हो गया 2014, 2015. So technically, if I'm trying to take a call from each country's perspective, please don't assume that it will go something like this. Not really. If your understanding is it's slightly incorrect, let me correct. It's equal annual installment. तो आपको हर साल 20% का फायदा मिलेगा. So if China does not have a trade agreement with Korea and China and India दोनों को 100% rate of duty है, तो China will keep giving 100% because that's the MFN rate of duty that they have to pay. But as in India, आपको हर साल China के against 20% का फायदा होगा, which means that it's 20% annual reduction. So अगर 2010 में 100 है, तो 11 में this will go 80, then this will go 60, then this will go 40, then this will go 20, and then that makes 2015 as a E5 or a 5th year. So 2010 plus E5, that is 10 plus 5 is equal to 15. अगर 2009 में agreement sign हुआ होता तो E5 मतलब 2014 में जाके आप 0% होते. So whatever is the signing date of a trade agreement and whatever is the status of your product, आप उतने साल equal annual. Similarly, if this would have been E8, this means what would have happened? This is equal to 100 divided by 8. हर साल 12.8% का ड्यूटी रिडक्शन होके 2018 में जाके ये 0% रेट होता. So I repeat, first thing first that you have to cross check is whether my country has a trade agreement at all or not. Point number 1. Second, आप क्या चेक करोगे? अगर मेरा ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट नहीं है तो मेरे किसी कंपीटिंग कंट्री का ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट तो नहीं है, because otherwise my business prospect are minimalistic. अगर हमारे में से किसी भी कंट्री का ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट नहीं है, then I am nothing to worry. I can still look forward that now I will do something nice and price competition, logistics बचाऊंगा. Import duty से मुझे कोई नुकसान नहीं है if ना तो मेरा ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट है ना ही किसी L2 player का ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट है in the country which is one of the largest buying country. So therefore, I will try to seek that explanation and clarification before start running after a buying lead from any country. Then comes a very interesting proposition. अगर मेरा trade agreement है और मेरे competitors का नहीं है, आंख बंद करके start looking for a buyer because in that case I have a tariff advantage. Challenge कहाँ आता है? Challenge आता है in countries. So I take you back to, if you've understood this concept of open, negative, sensitive, and you've also understood this concept of open E0, E5, E8, जो कि हर country के लिए अलग-अलग हो सकता है, that even if the product is open category, everything does not become zero on day one. So it becomes, I'll give you a live example. There was a company from Gujarat who had contacted us that, ma'am, we are looking for exports of groundnuts from India. So our question was very simple to them कि आप मूंगफली कैसे बेचना चाहते हो? So they said, ma'am, मूंगफली तो मूंगफली होता है, and you can look for any trade agreement where I get a benefit, as you say that हर agreement अच्छा नहीं होता है. So can you do this exercise on our behalf? So my question was, how do you want to sell your groundnuts? Is it the groundnut in shell, which is कि आप मूंगफली को छिलके के साथ बेचना चाहते हो? That is one 6-digit HS code for us. If you take out the chilka of the groundnut and you have the pods of the nut, and you have this red color covering intact on them, that's another way of selling groundnut, which is another 6-digit HSN code, groundnut unshelled. And the third category is you take out the red covering of the groundnut and break them into pieces. That's a separate 6-digit code. In a market that they were asking us to look for buyer, two products, which was groundnut chilke wala was in and also the pods with the red color intact, dono negative list mein the. If you were breaking the groundnut into pieces, that was in the open category. And why is it important for us to know? The labor cost is very very high. मूंगफली तो उसके पास भी है, बट वो आपसे मूंगफली क्यों खरीदना चाहता है? वो भी छिलका हटा के टूटी हुई मूंगफली खरीदना चाहता है, बिकॉज दैट विल सेव हिज लेबर कॉस्ट. सो इन द इंटरेस्ट ऑफ दैट आप इंपोर्ट भी कर रहे हो, बट आप अपने लोकल प्लेयर्स को compete नहीं करवाना चाह रहे हो. सो यू आर टेकिंग सम लेवल ऑफ वैल्यू एडिशन, बिकॉज then it makes some sense for a country to reduce the importer, and the importers also would like to give you business offerings. So we need to understand that there was a company in Himachal we were hand holding, and they were manufacturing aluminium sheets. The only thing that we told to them is, can you make this sheet from an 8 mm to 6 mm, because 8 mm का import duty अलग है, that is in the negative list. आप अभी भी MFN rate पर ही जाओगे. You are manufacturing aluminium sheets. Can you control it to the 6 mm width, and that will change the end use of the client that where you're trying to import in a trade agreement country. That is in the open category. So I repeat once again that import duty plays a very very important role when you're trying to target and position your product competitiveness in terms of pricing in front of a buyer who will take a very informed decision. Ignorance is not a bliss anymore. So prepare yourself very very categorically that if I want to target a particular country where I have a trade agreement, if I take you back to this slide where I asked you this particular question, that if I have a trade agreement with Sri Lanka and Canadians does not, don't take a buying or lead in your favor for granted, for a simple reason is, despite having two trade agreements with Sri Lanka has Indo-Sri Lankan FTA, it also has Sri Lanka in the SAFTA trade agreement. Despite having, अगर आपने गलती से ऐसा कोई product choose कर लिया which is in the negative list of Indo-Sri Lankan FTA, you and Canadians are back at par. Absolutely at par. आप भी MFN rate of duty पे जाओगे, Sri Lankans भी MFN rate of Canadians are in any case coming at the MFN rate of duty. So please take that decision very very cautiously. Second reason, do not get upset that I cannot sell anything to the US market just because the Canadians are selling, and I will have a tariff disadvantage. Of course, logistic disadvantage you will always have, but from a tariff standpoint, please do not get disheartened. I'll give you another very interesting case example. We were hand-holding certain companies in textile sector. They were making woolen garments. So they said, man, we are not able to supply our products to the US despite US being a great market for these woolen garments, only because the Mexicans were also supplying this at a NAFTA rate of duty. We started reading the NAFTA trade agreement because we started looking forward that ऐसा कोई तो 6-digit HS code होगा in the textile wool sector, which must be in the negative list of the NAFTA trade agreement. And we said that, sir, you just have to do one thing. Instead of making 100% wool, if you make a change in composition of 85% wool and 25% of a silk dhaga in it, that product is not a Mexican forte, and that is in the negative list of NAFTA trade agreement. So it is very important for us that we really cannot do until the time India signs a trade agreement with US. That's a G to G negotiation. जिसमें companies को का कोई you don't have any control on कब Europe trade agreement sign होगा, तो क्या तब तक मैं business नहीं कर पाऊंगा? So we have to leverage the trade agreement, reading in mind their negative list, and that is very very easy, and we'll see where to find all this information. दैट कहाँ पे साइन हुआ है, कब साइन हुआ है, E0 है, E5 है, in Japan it is B5, B7, B11, B9 and things like that. So we have to be extra cautious about these timelines. The third category is again a very interesting category, that if I am targeting a market where my competing country also have a trade agreement, तो क्या फिर मैं और वो exactly same पार पे हो जाते हैं? Not really. In this case, हो सकता है if you intelligently look at your trade agreement, the exact open negative sensitive list, and suppose for example you get a buyer in Singapore and the Chinese buyer is China is also exporting the same product to the Singaporeans. In the ASEAN and China trade agreement, try and look that आपका product open में हो और China और ASEAN का negative में हो. That is one thing that we've already learned. The other possibility could technically be that you are also open and they are also open and your factory already has a huge inventory. So कई बार companies हमसे बोलते हैं मैम it makes sense, it does make business sense that हम 6 mm की sheet को 8 mm की sheet को 6 कर लें, but I have an 8 mm sheet lying in my inventory during COVID-19 situation in the pandemic. आप पहले वो inventory तो clear कराओ and then we'll talk about creating new stuff with new mm sheets later. In such a scenario, we have no choice but to look for an opportunity to sell the things in my stock. So in such a scenario, we will select an open category product. China ka bhi open category. But then within the open category, if my agreement was signed in 2010, and for example, giving a dummy example, for example, Chinese trade agreement was signed in 2008. So I will try and match those HSN code where India product is open E0. This means मेरा leverage शुरू हुआ 2010 में because I signed a trade agreement in 2010. China signed a trade agreement in 2008, right? And we will try to see कि वही product उनके 2008 में E5 में fall करे तो उनका agreement शुरू होगा 2013 में. So 2010 और 2013 के बीच में China will not give me competition. We both have the open for that particular sector. So these are very interesting dimensions that we have seen while taking a call which product to be, and how do we leverage the regional trade agreement to our benefit. Where do you find this information? Let's talk about it. So we have, for India, we have this very, very readily available on our Ministry of Commerce website. If you go to the Ministry of Commerce website, on the home page, on the left-hand side, you will find an international trade policy, you will find export services, and you will find the logistics division. You have a lot of these publications, notifications, and you have a lot of these on the website. You have just changed the whole thing. Let's talk about international trade policy. And under the International Trade Policy Division, you have a lot of regional and multilateral trade divisions. You have a lot of these the trade agreements that have been signed across the WTO negotiations, across the trade agreements, and you can have a trade policy division. You have a regional and multilateral trade. So this is the functions of a division is that you have all the kinds of trade agreements that have been technically signed with the announcement of the officers that are being a part. So we are a part of a lot of APTA. We have a lot of preferential and non-preferential trade agreements. Then you have a lot of generalized system. We have, so please remember, yes, the GSP brings into consideration a lot of benefits that we have in countries. कई बार क्या होता है, we do not have a trade agreement, so to say, in a country. Like for example, you must have heard about US of or withdrawing GSP benefits on 50 odd items from India, and there was a complete chaos in the Indian market. What was this GSP all about? कभी कभी क्या होता है that there are certain countries जिनके साथ we do not have a full-fledged trade agreement, so to say. So the difference between generalized system of preferences and क्योंकि इसमें भी हमें tariff benefit मिल रहा है, ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट में भी टैरिफ बेनिफिट मिल रहा है, तो दोनों के बीच में अंतर क्या है? हमने ये मेगा अग्रीमेंट्स भी साइन करे हैं, ब्रिक्स का भी पार्ट है और जीएसपी का भी पार्ट है. सो इसमें अंतर क्या होता है? इन अ ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट इट इज अ टू वे प्रोसेस. Means if I sign a trade agreement with Korea, I have to offer the Koreans, certain benefits, and I take certain benefits to enter 0% rate of duty in the Korean market. But if US के साथ तो मेरा कोई trade agreement नहीं है. So if I do not sign a trade agreement with Europe or US, the concept of GSP is US takes the liberty as a developed country, and this is a law, that a developed country can offer the relaxed rate of duty something less than MFN. It can also be zero if the US wishes to do so. So US will take a call as a developed country that for the products that are emanating from the developing country and the least developed country can enter in the US at the relaxed rate of duty on the choice of those products on which US wants to offer us a choice. So technically countries ऐसा क्यों करते हैं? Because RTA is a two-way process, and it is quite taxing as a negotiation, that it's an entire plethora. आप 5,000 products के बारे में two-way process discuss कर रहे हो. That's a trade agreement, and maybe US is not interested to offer trade because generalized system of preferences is the second difference between the trade agreement and GSP is that RTA is discussing all the products, all 5,000 products. You have to discuss about them. आप उसको कोई भी status दीजिए, आप open दीजिए, negative दीजिए, E0 दीजिए, but you have to take a call when you're signing a trade agreement. In a generalized system of preferences, you select certain specific 6-digit code. Let's say Europe at one point of time had given a GSP benefit for Indian leather. Then we had gems and jewelry and the textile, where Indian 3 commodities from India were having this GSP benefit to enter the European market. We did not have a trade agreement with Europe at that point of time, but we had a GSP benefit. Chinese did not have this GSP benefit, and India really worked very hard, and we got opportunities in these 3 segments. Similarly, US used to offer the GSP benefit. A lot of agricultural imports from India. US used to offer a GSP benefits on a lot of handicraft exports from India, and that is why suddenly when the GSP benefit was withdrawn, it was a shock that came to the Indian exporters. So GSP and RTA, I repeat, GSP is for certain selected products. Trade agreement is for all the products. Second difference is GSP is a one-way process, which means that a developed country can offer the generalized system of preferential benefits to the products originating from a developing country and the least developed country. India as a developing country can offer GSP benefit to products coming from Bangladesh. So ये ऊपर से नीचे से ऊपर फ्लो होता है. इंडिया और बांग्लादेश यूएस में एंटर कर सकते हैं. बांग्लादेश इंडिया और यूएस दोनों में एंटर कर सकता है. It does not give a reciprocity process that if India is being given GSP benefit to the US in the US market for certain selected products, I do not have any commitment to offer anything in return the way it happens in a trade agreement. So that's exactly is that India was negotiating very hard to revive the GSP benefits that we used to have in the European market and the US market, which are the most important dream destinations. Now, the Commerce Ministry site will give you the list of all the trade agreements that we have been signing so far. You can look into the Trade Policy Division, which is talking about a lot of these TPDs, basically talking about the market access, the non-tariff barriers, the tariff barriers. We'll again visit this when we come in the next week on the non-tariff barriers, where that also plays a very important role. As far as the global, how will you come to know that किस country के साथ मेरा trade agreement है और किस country के साथ मेरे L2 का trade agreement है? तो आप technically क्या करोगे? आप ट्रेड मैप में जाओगे, आपको चावल एक्सपोर्ट करना है, आपने फटाफट देखा कि कौन सी कंट्रीज हैं जो चावल की सबसे बड़ी इंपोर्टिंग कंट्रीज हैं, एंड यू फाइंड दैट सऊदी अरेबिया एंड ऑल दीज कंट्रीज आर टिपिकली द वेरी वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग कंट्रीज. बट इन चाइना मैं कैसे पता लगाऊं कि इंडिया चाइना का ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट? तो मुझे कॉमर्स मिनिस्ट्री से पता लगेगा. बट क्या थाईलैंड को इसीलिए या म्यांमार को इसीलिए बेनिफिट मिल रहा है क्योंकि म्यांमार एंड चाइना का ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट है एंड इंडिया और चाइना का नहीं है? सो वो information I find there on the WTO.org. So when I visit the WTO.org as it gives me something called trade topics. When I go to trade topics, there is something called preferential trade agreement or the regional trade agreement. So I can click on the regional trade agreements and I have something called regional trade agreement database. So when it talks about regional trade agreement database, you can search the trade agreements that are there globally. So you can look for trade agreements by country and territory, and it will technically try to tell you किस country. Suppose I find on trade map that I am a rice exporter and I have to find out one of the destinations is China, which is big time rice importer. अब मुझे चाइना में बिजनेस मिलेगा नहीं मिलेगा, इंडिया का ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट है और थाईलैंड का नहीं है. सो आई विल सिंपली क्लिक ऑन चाइना एंड गेट टू नो दैट किस किस कंट्री. सो आसियान चाइना, इसीलिए म्यांमार इज एन आसियान कंट्री, इसीलिए उसको 0% रेट ऑफ ड्यूटी पे चावल बिक रहा है. इंडिया डज नॉट हैव अ ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट so far, इसीलिए we are entering at 65% rate of duty entering the Chinese market. So China has an agreement with ASEAN, it has an agreement with Australia, Chile, Costa Rica, Georgia, Hong Kong, Korea, New Zealand, Singapore. So अगर आप किसी भी ऐसी कंट्री में जाते हो, कोरिया में बाहर मिलता है, हांगकांग में मिलता है, पेरू में मिलता है, and China is your competing country, please be extra cautious. For example, Peru for that matter, it's a great Latin American country which is a buyer of a lot of commodities in which Indian MSMEs are good. India has a trade agreement with Peru. China also has a trade agreement with Peru, जो China आपका सबसे बड़ा competing player है. Select the HSN code very very cautiously. वही handicraft product का आप slight tweak कर दोगे, maybe you get a better tariff advantage as compared to China, क्योंकि दोनों का ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट है. सो प्लीज बी एक्स्ट्रा कॉशियस व्हाइल लुकिंग फॉरवर्ड फॉर दीज बिजनेस अपॉर्चुनिटीज इंटरनेशनली. लेट्स टेक द डिस्कशंस फॉरवर्ड. नाउ if you look into the second concept, one हो गया आपके प्रोडक्ट का what is the status of your product in a typical trade agreement, right? That's one thing. The second thing is, if you look into the Ministry of Commerce site that we just visited, you will find a very interesting game that किसी country के साथ इंडिया ने FTA साइन किया है. जैसे हो गया ASEAN, SAARC, SAFTA साइन किया है, श्रीलंका के साथ साइन किया है. किसी country के साथ we have signed a preferential trade agreement. जैसे you've already seen with Chile, with Peru, with Mercosur, Afghanistan, we've signed a preferential trade agreement. Now with Korea and Japan, we have signed Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, which is called as CEPA. With Singapore and Malaysia, which is also a party to ASEAN, we, apart from Indo-ASEAN Free Trade Agreement, we have one-on-one individual trade agreements as Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement with Singapore and Malaysia. And with Nepal, we have Treaty of Trade and Treaty of Transit. Now, ये ऐसा क्यों होता होगा? किसी कंट्री के साथ मैंने सेपा साइन किया है, किसी के साथ इंडियन गवर्नमेंट ने सीका साइन किया है. I've already discussed with you what is the PTAs and the FTAs. Please note that how are these two different? Now, the PTAs and FTAs. So, if you are a seller of import duty of a product which has an HSN code, for example, you are a goods and when you talk about the trade liberalization between countries using trade agreement, do you think, guys, ये सिर्फ products के लिए होता होगा? Tomorrow you can run a hotel industry of your own. So you will also want, you may run a consultancy business of your own. आप बोलोगे मैम हम तो प्रोडक्ट में डील ही नहीं करते, तो क्या ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट एक कंसल्टेंट को कोरिया में कंसल्टेंसी करने की लिबर्टी देता है? Or if I am a hotel, I am running a hotel business and I want to start an Indian hotel in Pattaya where a lot of Indian tourists. So don't you think a local Thai hotel runner who runs his business of hotel in the Pattaya will also have a same threat जो कि एक silk importer और businessman का होगा या rice के businessman का होगा? So the threat that is there for a goods sector is also a threat in a services sector, and therefore the trade agreements do not always talk about goods. They also talk about how services trade will happen between countries. They also talk about investment liberalization across different countries. So when we are technically talking about FTAs and PTAs, these become very important focus areas and focus markets for people who are dealing into goods sector, जिसका HS code है 01, 02, 98 chapters. Products में आप deal करते हो. But if you're trying to deal more into services, try to look into Korean market, Japanese market, where India has signed a SEPA trade agreement, because SEPA also talks about the tariff elimination on goods and reduction of goods. But the focus is technically the service liberalization, so we can prioritize our negotiating agenda across different countries. In countries where we have signed CECA, which is Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement, like Singapore and Malaysia, where investment liberalization is also talked about, and countries with नेपाल, नेपाल के साथ हमने क्या साइन किया है? ट्रीटी ऑफ ट्रांजिट. नेपाल इज अ पार्टी टू द सार्क नेशंस, सो साफ्टा तो है ही है, बट उसके साथ साथ हमने नेपाल को ट्रीटी ऑफ ट्रांजिट भी दिया है, विच मीन्स दैट नेपाल इज अ लैंडलॉक्ड कंट्री. उसके पास अपना सी पोर्ट नहीं है. सो इफ नेपाल हैज टू डू बिजनेस इन ऑस्ट्रेलिया, they will first pay the import duty to bring the products in the Indian border, then take it to the Calcutta or the Haldia port, and then you will venture technically in the Australian market, paying again the importers. So ऐसी countries जो landlocked countries होती हैं, वो क्या कभी business नहीं कर पाएंगी? Not really. So as a law, if Nepal का product is entering the Indian border just to use it as a transit, the way we use the Hong Kong port, the Singapore port, or the Dubai port. A lot of Indian companies use Dubai as a transit port to enter into Australian market. In such a scenario, the Dubai will not charge any kind of import duty. India will not charge Nepalis any import duties, because it is just allowing goods to pass duty free if they are not being imported for consumption, but only used as a port to work. So we'll ask them to pay certain loading charges, unloading charges, logistics charges, port handling charges, but we're not charging import duties in such a scenario, right? That's all because of Treaty of Transit. So the last thing on board is the level of RTA. So we have seen status of a product in an RTA. We saw the status in terms of open, negative, sensitive. We did see around open is also based on what time the product is getting the open status. Be very cautious of that. If depending on whether you are a goods services trader, try to select the right kind of trade agreement. And the third thing is, I come back to my question that why should you look into what's happening in the global market? Tomorrow, India is not a part of, say, for example, the South African Customs Union, but you still want to know that initially the South African countries, South Africa, Lesotho, then you have Botswana, Namibia and Swaziland, पहले ये लोग PTAs थे, उसके बाद ये लोग फ्री ट्रेड बन गए. हमारे साथ कुछ नहीं है, ना हमारे साथ कोई ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट हुआ. ये इनके आपस की कहानी चल रही है कि पहले इन कंट्रीज ने डिसाइड किया लेट्स स्ट्रक्चर अ PTAs amongst themselves. देन इनकी दोस्ती और गहरी हो गई. They decided that अब हम इस PTAs को let's convert into a free trade agreement. Then they decided, no, FTA भी हो गया, let's become all the more integrated and convert this into a customs union. अब ये कहानी मैं एज एन इंडियन एक्सपोर्टर दुनिया में देख रहा हूँ कि ये कैसे अपग्रेडेशन हो रहा है. एज अ थर्ड कंट्री पार्टनर, you do not have a trade agreement with any of these countries. You do not have a trade agreement with SACU as a bloc, the way we have it with Mercosur. But still, how does as a third outside country you have a benefit is very, very simple. What is the meaning of FTAs and PTAs? All of us are aware. Let's talk about what is customs union. For example, the 5 countries come together to upgrade themselves from a free trade agreement. So what's happening is, जब ये लोग आपस में PTA साइन कर रहे हैं, तो ये आपस में एक दूसरे के बनाए हुए products, made in Namibia products, is entering at something less than MFN in Botswana and South Africa. That's all about PTA. When they upgraded themselves into a free trade agreement, the same Namibian product is entering in Botswana at 0% rate of duty. The products coming in South Africa is entering in Lesotho at a 0% rate of duty. ये कहानी इनकी अपनी आपस में चल रही है. Now they have, but if I as an Indian company wants to target my exports to Namibia, South Africa, Botswana, Namibia can have its own independent tariff structure. So the same product may face a 5% rate of duty in Namibia. It can face a 25% rate of duty in Swaziland, and Botswana can offer 10% rate of duty. So when an FTA is being signed amongst themselves, they decide that हम आपस में 0% रखेंगे. But for any country who is outside us, we will have an independent we'll have an independence to pick and choose हम बाहर के countries को क्या import duty देना चाहते हैं. But the minute they get in themselves upgraded into a customs union, this means that they unanimously take a call that we will act as one nation. This means that any country outside ourselves wanting to target either of these countries, we will offer them one single common external tariffs. Now this is a great game changer for me. An immediate business advantage that comes to me as an Indian company, eyeing what is happening between these countries, is that पहले मैं शायद अपना टारगेट मार्केट नामीबिया रखता, क्योंकि out of all the 5 African countries, only Namibia offered me 5% rate of duty. बोत्सवाना में मेरा प्रोडक्ट 10% में बिकता, स्वाजीलैंड में 30% पे बिकता, साउथ अफ्रीका में 40% पे बिकता. But the minute they agree amongst themselves that we will have one common tariffs, it is quite possible that that common external tariff for my product may be decided as a consensus, maybe 15%. तो मुझे नामीबिया में तो घाटा हुआ क्योंकि 5 से वो 15 हो गया. बट देन इट इज अ गुड न्यूज फॉर मी दैट साउथ अफ्रीका का 40 भी 15 हो गया, बोत्सवाना का 25 भी 15 हो गया, स्वाजीलैंड का 30 भी 15 हो गया. सो आई एज एन इंडियन कंपनी, आई एम टेकिंग एडवांटेज ऑफ देयर upgradation as a customs union to find out my selling proposition not only in Namibia now, but the disadvantage that I have in Namibia is counteracted by the business opportunities in 4 different markets. That's an immediate benefit if I keep a track of what's happening across the global market. Second very, very interesting benefit. In order to reach the Namibia market, मैं पहले क्या करता था? I used to, go out. My exit port, for example, is Mundra port, or it is the JNPT port on the west coast. I used to travel all the way down south from South Africa and go to the west coast. So going to west coast, my logistics cost would have been very, very high because I have Namibia on the west coast of Africa. Now, because these countries have offered me one single import duty, I will change my entry port. I can choose to enter the entire SACU as a customs union through Swaziland, and I sell my product in Swaziland. I save on my logistics cost. I can sell a lot of perishable products now. पहले मैं फ्लोरिकल्चर शायद नहीं बेच पाता क्योंकि नामीबिया तक पहुंचते पहुंचते मेरा फूल खराब हो जाता है. So you can save on your logistics time, you can save on your logistics cost just because you have been intelligent enough to observe what's happening in the countries beyond where India does not have a trade agreement. So that's about the customs union process. If you go as a next thing, it is known as common market. Now, maybe you are MSME and you may not be eyeing these opportunities as a common market. Common market में क्या होता है? That there is a free movement of factors of production. Let me give an example. Let me give you this example. कई बार क्या होता है, लोग अगर इंडिया से कोई माल यूरोप देना चाहते हैं तो आई डू नॉट हैव अ ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट इन यूरोप, तो मुझे उसी प्रोडक्ट के लिए MFN रेट ऑफ ड्यूटी देना पड़ेगा. सो मे बी दिस MFN रेट ऑफ ड्यूटी इज 42%. बट इफ आई change my country of origin from a developing country to an African nation which is a least developed country, मुझे चार फायदे हो जाते हैं. Number one, I will get a benefit of a least developed country. So maybe the GSP जिस प्रोडक्ट को उसने इंडिया को GSP बेनिफिट नहीं दिया है, maybe अफ्रीका को उसके लिए GSP बेनिफिट दिया हो, which is actually the case. A lot of African products, because you have a least developed country status and the developed Europe is a developed country, I have an MFN rate of duty, and the same product, if it is originating from Africa, gets a GSP rate of 12%. So I save a huge amount of import duty. I become logistically closer to the European Union. So countries क्या करते हैं technically? I will import my components. I will assemble them in Africa, because otherwise rules of origin का issue आ जाएगा. I just cannot take an Indian product and route it through an African country. It does not become a make in Africa until the time you do some validation, and that also will depend on what is the rules of origin status between Europe under the GSP benefit. That कब वो GSP 12% GSP रेट वो यूरोप अफ्रीका के प्रोडक्ट को कब देगा, बिकॉज वो जब वो एश्योर हो जाएगा कि कोई भी कंट्री इसका फायदा नहीं उठा रहा है. इंडियंस क्या आपको सिर्फ रूट करके फायदा तो नहीं उठा रहे. तो रूल्स ऑफ ओरिजिन इसमें बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट एक कंपोनेंट हो जाता है ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट में, वेयर इफ टू कंट्रीज हैव अ ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट and they have decided that every other country will buy, I will buy from every other country at the MFN rate of duty. तेरा और मेरा एक agreement हो जाता है, तो I give you a relaxed rate of duty which is not extended to anybody. Now how do I ensure that कोई थर्ड कंट्री इंडिया को वो पैसेज लेकर मेरी कंट्री में ना आ जाए, क्योंकि अगर मैं डायरेक्टली खरीदता तो MFN रेट मिलता. So I will route it through India and I will try to venture in that market at a GSP rate of duty. So in order to avoid that, the importing customs will ask you for a tag. इसीलिए आप टी-शर्ट्स में देखते हो, मास्क में देखते हो, मेड इन इंडिया का टैग लगा होता है, composition लगा होता है, 80% cotton, 20% silk, because that composition decides the exact HSN code of the product, and the made in India will decide, the tag will decide कि country of origin क्या है. So the HS code is finalized, the country of origin is finalized. If India is trying to target a trade agreement country, the custom clearance of that country will say composition देख के check करो, ये ओपन में है, नेगेटिव में है, सेंसिटिव लिस्ट में है, और इंडिया अगर कंट्री ऑफ ओरिजिन है तो बेस्ड ऑन द ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट बिटवीन इंडिया एंड दैट कंट्री एंड द एक्सेस कोड इज इन द ओपन कैटेगरी, द कस्टम क्लियरेंस विल हैपन एट अ 0% rate of duty. That is why these packaging norms, these labeling norms becomes very, very important to avail the benefits of trade agreement in the final destination. So what Indian companies and normally even Chinese have done to a lot of extent. China ने बहुत कुछ investment अफ्रीका में किया हुआ है, only and only to take an advantage of a shift in country of origin. That अगर मैं सिर्फ transit नहीं कर सकता हूँ, तो टेक्निकली मैं मैन्युफैक्चर करके थोड़ा बहुत वैल्यूडेशन करूंगा अफ्रीका में, एंड आई कैन अवेल अ जीएसपी बेनिफिट बाय चेंजिंग माय कंट्री ऑफ ओरिजिन फ्रॉम चाइना टू अफ्रीका. इन सच अ सिनेरियो कॉमन मार्केट कम्स टू माय रेस्क्यू, लाइक कोमेसा फॉर दैट मैटर. पहले ये लोग पीटीए थे, फिर एफटीए हुए, फिर 19 countries in Africa has come to form a structure called as common market for Eastern and Southern Africa, where you have Libya and Zimbabwe, Mauritius. तो आप अगर वहाँ इन्वेस्टमेंट करना चाहते हो, आपको जमीन की ज़रूरत होगी, लेबर की ज़रूरत होगी, फाइनेंसेस की ज़रूरत होगी, try to choose a country within the COMESA. And the COMESA would mean that once you have a factory set up in one of the COMESA region, you can buy factors of production. आप लेबर किसी और कंट्री से उठा सकते हो, फाइनेंस किसी और कंट्री से उठा सकते हो. The movement of factors of production utilized to set up your factory within the COMESA will be free, because they have signed a common market treaty amongst themselves. So use these treaties globally to expand your business opportunity as an investment opportunities in these countries. So that's the advantage of keeping a track. So we have learned a lot of things about status, about type, about levels, about rules of origin. So that's all, friends. I hope you know how to take a leverage of trade agreement. So take an informed decision, and that is my advice to all of you. So we can take certain question and answers. We haven't. We have backed out, Mr. Prashant. We have backed out from our sub agreement. So, as of now, not. The answer is no. Uh, I think the recorded videos, Ms. Kavleen, who is taking care of the sessions, can technical. This is more of an administrative question, Mr. Raj Shekhar. Uh, I think we have any other questions. Okay, how to become an IFT member as an export startup? Through this Niryat Bandhu program, we are giving you a lot of these initiatives in terms of you can see our recorded sessions. You can also get in touch with us where we can help the companies to get into exports. We also keep doing an open program, sir, where the management development programs of a shorter duration. We also run a full-fledged certificate program in export-import management of 4 months over the weekends. It is all online. So whatever you are seeing and understanding in a 2 hours period, you technically get to understand at a duration of 4 months. And not only this, you also get a lot of insights from the business leaders. You have a lot of insights where discussions are invited through government. You get to network with DGFT officials. You get to network with a lot of live policy makers and get to understand the governmental perspective of why and how these policy announcements can impact your business call. So I would earnestly request all of you keep a track on ift.edu as a website, and we keep giving you these insights off and on about different management development programs, which are some of them are open in nature, short duration programs to get more beyond what you have learned in just 2 hours time. So I think I will, last thing last, if I do not have and I have certain time, okay. Okay, L1, L2, L3 parties, you must have missed my other session, Mr. Rajshekhar. L1 was basically companies which are Indian companies who obviously will compete if you are exporting a particular product. You will obviously have competition at 3 levels. There are Indian companies who can compete in the same product category. There are the Chinese companies who are global competitors for you, and you will also might have certain manufacturer of the same product that's being exported, being traded in a country of import. For example, if I'm a leather exporter from Agra and I'm targeting a European market, the Italian leather companies and brands become my level 3 competitors. So that is what we meant by L1, L2, and L3. What is a trade agreement when we made, well, what is a trade agreement? It is, Miss Geeta, I think it's pretty clear because you've given me a question at 6:39. So I think this was a very initial question that you have raised. Trade agreement is technically not between an individual buyer and seller. Regional trade agreement are policy decisions made by the governmental to governmental negotiation to facilitate the trade between the importers and the exporters. You get to enter an importing country at a much relaxed import duties if your country has signed a trade agreement with that country. No, trade map is just giving you a data of which country is an importer of your product, which country is an exporter of your competing of your product, who else are your L2 players in a same product category in that market, and how do you pick the products. The analysis of trade agreement is basically from an RTA database from the WTO website, which gives you a global feel of किस country ने किसके साथ क्या trade agreement sign किया है, and from an Indian perspective, you have Indian Commerce Ministry website, which gives you this information. Okay. The framework agreement is an initial agreement without the actual signing of a trade agreement. So I think we have answered most of the questions, guys. Before I leave, a very practical request to all of you. As I've already been indicating, don't take trade agreements for granted and don't get carried away by the newspaper announcement that, because I'm telling you out of our experience at IFT while handling these companies, that companies have started approaching us to make business plans to target the European market. Abhi agreement sign bhi nahi hua hai. We do not know which product will come in the open category, negative category. Please take an informed decision once you have these formal documents on the Commerce Ministry website. That's my earnest request. Second request, I would, and it is in continuation with the session that I took on the market identification, guys. I will take you back, and since I have some time of just 1 minute, I would like you to please also understand that when you are targeting a trade agreement country, please customize your orders, because a 6-digit code is a 6-digit code. So the international negotiations happen at a 6-digit code. But जब आप अपना product किसी country में बेचते हो, that same 6-digit code, the way it is imported and consumed in Thailand is different. And please refer back to my session of National Tariff Line, where it says that yes, you have a product in the open category in a particular market, so you get smiles on your face. Wow, I get a buyer now. The buyer selection, ये सारी Indian companies के लिए India ने opportunity खोली है by putting that product in the open category. तो आपने L2 को तो खत्म कर दिया, because China may not be having a trade agreement, India has a trade agreement. But ये agreement जो India और उस country के बीच में sign हुआ is open for all the L1 competitor who is also an Indian company utilizing this trade agreement to enter that market. How do you as a firm take a better advantages to customize your product as per the NTL of the trading country? And what does it mean? Understand your consumer, understand the buying pattern quickly. For that matter, we were doing this exercise that India is about to sign and had a discussion with Eurasian Economic Union. So there are certain sectors like rubbers, then medical devices. अगर आप medical device बेचना चाहते हैं रशिया में, Kazakhstan में, huge opportunity. We have, services. Indian legal services a huge opportunity in Belarus, Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, and so on. Textile has a huge opportunity, but then within textile, you have specific opportunities for tracksuits. You have specific opportunities for gloves and mittens. Like, for example, in CIS countries, you have a huge opportunities for selling pearls. But please remember, अगर अर्मीनिया में जाना है तो कल्चर्ड पर्ल लेके जाना है, जॉर्जिया में जाना है तो नेचुरल पर्ल लेके जाना है. We need to understand. For example, I'm seller of wooden products. I reiterate, in a country like Kyrgyzstan, they need wooden statues, but non-tropical wood. In Moldova, they need statues of a tropical wood. Now, please understand, these are the specific traits of products beyond the 6-digit HSN code. Your RTA negotiation will freeze at a 6-digit HSN code. तो स्टैचूज है. तो सरकार क्या बोलेगी, मैंने रशिया के साथ, मोल्डोवा के साथ एक ट्रेड अग्रीमेंट साइन किया है जिसमें वुडन स्टैचूज की इंपोर्ट ड्यूटी 0 करी जाती है. लेकिन if you do not understand the concept of national tariff line, you will not be able to take leverage against other Indian company who has understood that yes, दोनों स्टैचूज में 0% है, but Russia में I have to sell a non-tropical wood and Moldova में I have to send a tropical wood. That is beyond the story, beyond the 6-digit HSN code. So please revert back to my session on the product selection, and I think I would stop now. And I hope you have understood where I'm coming from, that apart from that, you can take a leverage of a trade agreement much better as compared to other Indian company if you've actually understood your market on 16 to 17 parameters, which we have already learned in the last class in terms of the age, the demographic profiles, the consumer preferences in that market. Like, for example, we were doing the CIS market and we found that the dress of Belarus people are something simple, similar to the Naga shawls. The HS code is the same. तो आप टेक्सटाइल को डिजाइन कैसे करोगे? The 63 HSN code 6309 is a 0% rate of duty. But how do you technically take कि design क्या बिकेगी? Similarly, in UK, अगर कल को trade agreement sign हो जाता है, after COVID-19, there is a red alert on kids having skin cancers. So companies in India have started looking for an opportunity to sell them the linen frocks in a kids segment. So textile is a textile. हर कंपनी को टेक्सटाइल बेचने पे 0% रेट ऑफ ड्यूटी मिलेगा, बट क्या बिकेगा टेक्सटाइल में, उसकी डिजाइनिंग क्या होगी, कॉटन होगा, लिनन होगा, हाउ डू यू कन्वर्ट योर बिजनेस आइडियाज, दैट विल प्रोटेक्ट यू फ्रॉम वन L1, every L1 having the same advantage. So please understand all this. The story can go on, and we can keep sharing experiences. You're most welcome to join our 4-month certificate program where we deal in much more detail all these aspects. Kavleen, thank you from my side.